This episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show is brought to you by Nissan. As a pioneer in the electric vehicle space, Nissan is always looking for ways to deliver new, meaningful technology to EV owners. After all, Nissan has been making EVs since 1947, and their EVs have now traveled 8 billion miles by Nissan Leaf owners since 2010. 8 billion miles. That's the equivalent of driving to Pluto and back. I guess it's, I don't know, doesn't matter if it's a planet maybe when we're doing this. Think that's electrifying? One of their EVs trekked all the way to the North Pole, and Nissan even tests their EV technology on the Formula E racetrack. But Nissan knows you can't get an EV just for the E. You get a Nissan EV because it makes you feel electric, because it sparks your imagination, it ignites something within you, it pins you to your seat, takes your breath away. At least that's what Nissan thinks about when they're designing their EVs like the Nissan Ariya and the Nissan Leaf. It's about creating a thrilling design that electrifies its customers. I like Nissan's focus on creating a thrilling drive and electrifying life. In today's world, it's so important to look around you, pay attention, look for all the tiny ways that life can electrify you. For me, that's reading an audiobook outside and preparing for this show. Nissan, EVs that electrify.
Thanks for wearing the Indiana Jones hat, man.
Well, I'm having a really bad hair day.
Oh, you are?
So
I was like, oh, he always wears the uniform. That's great.
I do. I always wear the same thing. I have nothing else. I got 36 of these blue shirts.
So I did hear that from Nick Nanton. He's like, oh, Ramy only has blue shirts.
How do you know Nick?
Actually, through mutual friends, but I'm pretty sure he said that somewhere, and because I don't remember him telling me that. But I don't know him well. I just know him through mutual friends. But I think he did a video with you, and I think in the ending credits it says Ramy has 66 blue shirts or 37 blue shirts or whatever it is.
True.
Yeah,
it's true. I always make up the number, but yes.
Because I was going to say that's a lot of blue shirts. You really need like 4.
Well, no,
you
need just enough for 2 weeks of travel.
Okay,
so you don't have to do laundry.
Right,
and then when you come back, it's going to take a week or so before you do. You just need 36 of them.
36.
You go through them. And then the best part is that every year on a Black Friday, you just order 2 dozen blue shirts. And then you're good for
And then the ones with holes in the armpits, they go back.
Yes.
They go out the door. Good. Well, thanks for coming in, man. I wanted to do a show about Egypt. And then I was like, oh, let's do something. If there's famine, there's military, there's civil unrest. And then I was like, actually, maybe we do something positive about Egypt. Maybe we mix some of that other stuff in there. But I wanted to go back as far as I could to something that everybody knows and loves about Egypt, which is ancient Egypt. And, that's where you come in for the most part.
Perfect.
I just think it's kind of too low-hanging fruit to be like, tell me all of the things wrong with the country where you're from. And it's like, come on, man. Had an empire before people invented the fork.
That's very true. Well, that's also very hard to talk about. A lot of people do not realize that ancient Egypt as a civilization is far too long to try and explain or say something brief about. From the first ancient Egyptian king recorded in history to the last ancient Egyptian king recorded in history is more time than from the last ancient Egyptian king to today, which means ancient Egypt was more ancient to itself at some point than it is to us today. That's how long that civilization was. And if you talk about any other place in the world just 100 years ago or 200 years ago, how different things were, can you tell me about America 200 years ago? Everything was different.
I mean, nothing.
That's 200 years ago. We're talking about 6,000 years of history.
That is so wild. It's hard to wrap our mind around that as people that live 80 years or whatever and haven't quite gotten there yet and only live once. Because that means the ancient Egyptians had ancient Egyptians.
Absolutely, they were ancient. King Tut came in 1500s BC, around that time, which is about 3,500 years ago. Now, King Tut went and visited the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, which was about 3,000 years older than King Tut himself.
Oh my gosh.
King Tut is nearly as old as the pyramids were for King Tut. So for King Tut, he was going to visit his ancient Egyptian ancestors of the Great Pyramids of Giza for this ancient sign, just like us going to visit it today.
Wow.
That's how long this civilization Was.
It's so hard to wrap your mind around. Think about that. He goes there and goes, man, I wonder if aliens built these. that's what we do when we go there, right?
I can bet you King Tut did not think aliens built his grand-ancestors' pyramids.
Yeah, he was, I guess, was during the time of King Tut then, this is probably a dumb question, but that's why I'm here. Were they still building pyramids, or were those like, man, we can't do those anymore. We just got to do tombs times two. We don't have the time, the resources.
It's very interesting because, the Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, is one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world.
Right.
The most ancient one of them all, and the only one surviving. The only one surviving. It is.
The other ones were what, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which
correct.
Right.
Everything disappeared. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, everything is in ruins, disappeared. It couldn't stand time and nature and humans. But the Great Pyramid of Giza did, and the reason it was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, or it is one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, is because. It is not because it's 1 million blocks, each of which is 3 to 5 tons each, stacked on top of each other.
It's 1 million blocks?
Absolutely, yeah. Stacked on top of each other in a perfect triangle. It's a perfect pyramid shape with no glue attaching them, and have lasted all these years. They used pressure to take the air out of between each stone so they can stick together for 6,000 years at least.
Wait, they used pressure?
Yes, air pressure.
Wait a minute.
It's very complicated,
What?
and there's so many theories. Yeah, but there's no actual glue that we found, like mortar, that we found that they used between the blocks.
I figured they put limestone in there or something. No,
it was the air pressure, and it's a very simple method that has been redone today to check it out. But it's very simple. You make them wet, and as they get dry, the air gets sucked out, and they attach together forever.
Crazy. Does Egypt get earthquakes?
Egypt has earthquakes. I've survived a couple. I've lost friends too, but never affected the Great Pyramid of Giza.
That is so, because you would think, okay, well, an earthquake will take care of this, because it's over 6,000 years old. That's a lot of earthquakes, and the thing just looks like, I mean, aside from the external cover of limestone or whatever it was that was supposed to make it white and shiny, they're in pretty good shape.
Absolutely, it is mind-boggling. I do understand why people would go there and say it must be aliens. Humans couldn't have done this. I do understand it. I do understand why. I'm flattered by it sometimes.
Yes.
Because it is unfathomable to your human brain to go in there and say, how could they have done this 6,000 years ago? It's somehow demeaning to think that us humans were capable of this 6,000 years ago, and we still haven't made it this far. If we were just as good as they were 6,000 years ago and kept getting better at what we did, we would have been so much further ahead.
You would think so. Yeah.
But we hurt ourselves along the way, often.
A lot of plagues, a lot of wars,
a
lot of genocidal stuff that gets rid of cultures and civilizations and knowledge and things like that. It's just really crazy. I mean, looking at how Egypt is now from a government perspective, kind of a mess, I think.
Yes.
Probably been that way for a while. But having a historical perspective that goes back thousands of years, it's almost like any chaos that Egypt is going through right now is just the blink of an eye in terms of Egyptian history. I mean, this is a footnote in an Egypt civilization book that focuses on whatever came before and then whatever comes after.
Absolutely. And ancient Egypt went through multiple problems and multiple fallouts. After the Old Kingdom, ancient Egypt is separated into mainly Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. And the Old Kingdom is like the Great Pyramids of Giza and all that stuff. The Middle Kingdom is people that you haven't heard about too much. The New Kingdom is King Tut and Ramesses and Akhenaten and all these famous ones too. But between each kingdom, Egypt went through horrible time. It's been invaded by the Hyksos, people that came from the north that took over Egypt that were very rude. We found letters that said that king of the Hyksos who invaded Egypt was yelling at the other king of Egypt who was in the south, telling him, quiet your hippos, 1,000 kilometers away. That's 700 miles away. Quiet your hippos, I can't sleep at night. Stuff like that. on actual hieroglyphic inscriptions. And these times, if you look at them, when I study them, 6,000 years of history, I think of the Hyksos time as a moment. But you look at those times, and some of them are 200 years, 300 years. People have
God.
lived and died
Right.
when Egypt was just a complete chaos in between being the strongest civilization ever.
And people lived probably to age 30 back then. So when you're talking 200 years, this is a lot of generations. And it's funny that they took the time to inscribe on some tomb wall or some pyramid wall in hieroglyphics, like, I got a beef with, basically the equivalent of, I got beef with my downstairs neighbor. That asshole is super loud, and he's got a fat ass. It's like, am I translating this correctly? This guy is just yelling about his neighbor's bullshit.
Absolutely. The things that make it, though, because it wasn't inscribed on a tomb or a wall. It was actually a letter that we found, a little pottery letter inscribed with it that we found. But it's funny because 6,000 years of history and everything you see about ancient Egypt today, everything that we've discovered, is calculated to be about just 12% of ancient Egypt. Everything you've seen at the museums, the Egyptian Museum is filled, 4 stories filled of ancient Egyptian stuff, pyramids, temples, all that is only about 12% of what ancient Egypt has. Still, 88% of ancient Egypt is still hiding under the sand.
Wait. So we've only discovered 12% of the tombs and things like that wow, that's exciting, actually.
Correct.
Because that's like finding out that the last thing you opened on Christmas was actually just one of many more gifts that are hiding under the tree.
There's much more under that tree.
Wow, that's really, really incredible. I didn't realize. I had that note somewhere to ask you how much of that stuff was undiscovered. I'm not going to be able to find the note right now. But
well, you can't ask me that question anymore as well because I answered it.
I'll ask you something related to it, and it'll be way out of place in the show, but it won't matter.
Okay.
Multiple Emmy wins. You're the first Egyptian to win an Emmy, which is congrats on that.
Thank you very much.
23 nominations, 9 Emmys. I mean, that sounds like a lot.
Oh, you have all the numbers correct. Yes.
Yeah. I try to do that occasionally. Get stuff right.
Yes.
But now, unfortunately, you're not the only Egyptian Emmy winner. In fact, you're not even the only Egyptian named Ramy to win an Emmy.
Very unfortunate, correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
100% of Egyptian Emmy winners are named
Ramy. Yes.
Yeah, Ramy.
Very correct.
It's a very unfortunate coincidence.
I used to love it, but now I can't even say I'm the only Egyptian named Ramy to win an Emmy because of Rami Malek.
Yeah.
And another Ramy.
That's pretty good.
Ramy Youssef.
Oh, yeah.
Who's also won an Emmy. Ramy Youssef, the show on Hulu, Ramy. Great show. You should watch it.
You're in good company. I mean, I forgot Rami Malek was Egyptian.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a really good actor, too.
Really, really
so
good.
if you're going to be co-Emmying with another Egyptian named Ramy,
I'm very proud.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yes.
So your dad used to produce, was it Discovery Channel documentaries about Egypt? And so the family business then is what? Documentaries and
correct.
Historical stuff?
I grew up in Egypt. And I remember I was always with my father and with my mother on set. And set is ancient Egyptian ruins, tombs never been discovered, with Discovery Channel, National Geographic, BBC documentaries, making documentaries about ancient Egypt. And I remember starting to work with him at the age of 8 or 9. My father was the only person in town that was doing it right.
Really?
So, yes, he was really good at it. It was called The Fixer.
Sure.
Which to many Americans sounded like a drug deal, but
it does sound a little bit sketchy.
But it's not. It's just the local producer, a person that can do everything you need to make a documentary happen in the country. And I remember I was 13 when he left me alone with a BBC production because he had another one that he had to do. My mother had another one they had to. And I was 13, 12, going around, going to the Great Pyramids of Giza, seeing the general manager, the director of the Great Pyramid, saying, "Hi, my dad sent me. We're going to film here today."
He must have been like, "Are you kidding me?"
No, he knew me all
He knew
along,
you,
and that's
that's funny though.
What I had that no one else did as well is I was spoiled. I had all the contacts and the trust, which matters so much in Egypt from all these people in the place. And I did documentaries growing up with my father all the way through.
So were you like a location scout? Is that kind of what's
a fixer
/ location?
The fixer is a combination of a line producer, a production manager, a location scout, and whatever else a fixer does
Whatever
that I
needs
can't
to get
talk
done.
about on air.
Yeah, like smuggling equipment in through customs. There's probably some of that. Maybe we'll get to that. You have your first credit at 11 years old in some BBC documentary. That must have been really awesome. Or were you so young you didn't even kind of understand what that meant at that time?
I was very proud of it, but I took it around at school. I showed it to everyone,
Mhm.
and no one cared.
No.
No one understood what that
Right.
was or what it meant. And I thought, holy cow, I have credit. I didn't think I'm 11 and I have credit on a BBC documentary as the location manager. I just thought I have credit on
I'm
a
in a movie.
BBC documentary.
Yeah, I'm in a movie. My name's in a movie.
And no one cared at school. All the other 11-year-old boys were interested in soccer, and I wasn't as good, so that didn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I guess Egyptian child labor laws are a little flexible over there. If you're 11 and you're working on a movie, like, don't worry about school. Just go to the pyramids alone, well, with a crew from another country, and have them film it, and then you can make up the homework later, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so funny, though, that your dad just left you with a client at that age.
I do remember a story when I was young as well with my father on location. They were doing, I think it was a National Geographic or BBC, a documentary about a shaft that goes underneath the Sphinx, and it was a newly discovered shaft, hasn't been opened in hundreds of years, and we were all down on like filming the discovery of the shaft. No one knows what's down there yet. Dr. Zahi Hawass, who is one of the greatest Egyptologists ever to live and still alive, he is my godfather of Egyptology, as we say. But we were down there, and I was still a young boy in the shaft. It's 2 football fields down behind the butt of the Sphinx.
It's 2 foot underground, 2 football fields.
Yeah.
Wait, they dug that deep underneath.
Yes.
Why did they do? Is that because the sand is unstable, or what's the deal there?
Well, the reason they mostly dug that deep for tombs and places, and it always came later in time. Pyramids were at the beginning. They would make the tombs in pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
But then as time passed, they would make the tombs more hidden and dug inside. And the reason is the most obvious. Tomb raiding was not something of the modern times. Tomb raiding was something of the ancient times as well. That's when it started. And a great pyramid right in front of you is the sign that says, "Come here, there's treasure."
Right.
And since then, and tomb raiding was horrific. Especially during the Hyksos time, when especially during all the invasions when Egypt fell apart and came back, every one of these places were completely like emptied of all the treasure. There was nothing found inside the Great Pyramid in modern times.
That's such
nothing.
A bummer.
Not a single piece of gold, not even nothing was found inside. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people saying, well, what was it really for? It was the tomb of the pyramid, but it was ransacked.
Right. For hundreds of years, over and over again, probably.
As a matter of fact, not a single tomb or temple that we've ever discovered in the modern times wasn't ransacked.
Really? So have we never found a tomb that is just, they didn't find it?
The closest ever was about 100 years ago, and it was King Tut's tomb.
That's what I thought. I thought that was the big deal about that.
And still, it was ransacked just a little bit during a specific time. They took the oils because they were most precious, but it was closed. But that's the only reason King Tut's tomb is famous. Because King Tut didn't live that long, doesn't have a great story, wasn't a great king, was a child, only did it for 6 years. His tomb is the smallest tomb ever to be found in ancient in the Valley of the Kings. He had the least stuff ever. But the only reason he's that famous is because King Tut's tomb was not touched.
So this is like aliens come by Earth in 1,000 years and they're studying automobiles and they dig up a Ford Fiesta. And they're just like, look at this. And everyone who knows cars is like, dude, you don't understand. This is not the epitome of our technology.
Pretty much. Yeah. So King Tut is the Ford Fiesta of ancient Egypt, yes.
Sorry, Tut. You're still important. You're the only one that was intact.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you grew up around tombs, mummies, tombs. Did tombs full of bodies not rattle you a little bit at age 11?
It's funny because I only started getting scared of mummies later on.
Yeah.
Not when I was a kid hanging out with mummies all the way through.
Sure.
It's when I started watching American movies about mummies
Right,
when
like-
I actually got scared
Sure.
from mummies. It was a beautiful movie, but then I went back to the tomb and I was like, holy cow, that
Yeah.
thing might move and kill me.
Right, yeah, those little bugs are going to come up from the sand and eat you or
Yes.
whatever, those
Yeah,
scarab
great
things.
movie, yes.
Did you ever think maybe they sent you in the tomb first to see if there was anything dangerous in there?
Well, I think now I think about it. Actually,
Yeah, now it's like, wait a minute.
the rest of that story when we were down in the two football fields down
yeah.
under the Sphinx's butt in that tunnel was that we went all the way down and Dr. Zahi is on camera finding everything, and then he finds a little shaft at the corner of the bottom. The bottom ground was filled with water, underground water.
Oh, that makes sense.
And there
yeah.
was a tomb of a god in the middle of it, a sarcophagus, beautiful stone sarcophagus. That's two football fields down. We can't barely breathe. We can. It feels like we can breathe, but we're starting to not talk right because there's not enough oxygen down there. And then there's a little shaft up in the right corner. And they started trying to reach in there. They couldn't really reach in there. It's too small. And I know you know where this is going.
Yeah.
And that was the case. There was no robots back at the time yet to send them in. And Dr. Zahi just looked for a small child around. And that was me.
Yeah.
And they sent me in. They carried me up. It was an up in the right corner. They carried me up, put me inside that shaft, and I crawl in. And that was before I watched the movie The Mummy.
Sure.
So I was still fine going into little shafts under this thing.
Not claustrophobic or anything?
No, I was very
my God.
excited. I was very excited.
Sure.
And I crawled all the way in till they couldn't see me anymore. And I was yelling back about things that I'm seeing. Nothing exciting yet. And then I found at the end, there were a limestone, what looks like a little gate, but it's not. It's a limestone false door. And it had a couple of hieroglyphic inscriptions on it. And I yelled them out to Dr. Zahi.
Because you could read it even then.
I knew about the hieroglyphic inscriptions. I was still studying them, but Dr. Zahi was helping. But I was yelling out the shapes, and he was helping. And I
bird, cat, sun, ankh,
a poop
bird.
emoji. Yes.
Yeah, poop emoji, exactly.
And then I came back out, and it wasn't significant discovery, but the feeling I had at that moment, that was the feeling. Holy cow!
Yeah,
discovering something
no one had seen that. No one living had ever seen that.
That's me.
Yeah.
And me, I've discovered it, and it's such an addiction that you can't stop doing it for the rest of time. There's a funny story about how archaeologists it's a joke, how archaeologists walk around, and they always walk around looking down, and they just looking for things all the way through. If you look at any archaeologist walking in the middle of the desert of the pyramid, they're not looking up at the Great Pyramids of Giza. They're just looking under their feet as they walk, because they could find anything at any time, and it's a feeling that they want so bad.
I see. Yeah. God, it seems so incredible that there's so much undiscovered. And that I would not send my kid into a 200-yard deep underground shaft. But again, he knew the feeling you were going to get, and maybe he wanted you to have that gift. How do you know it's safe to go in there and it's not going to collapse when you walk in there?
Great question. You do not.
Right, yeah. You
did not know, man.
Yeah.
But you at least get the confidence in the fact that this thing has been here for 6,000 years.
Yeah.
I have to be so unlucky that the moment I go in, it collapses after 6,000 years.
That's true. I suppose there's rules like, hey, if you see a big rock, don't push that big rock out of the way because it might be holding up the rest of the tunnel. There's probably some rules like that you follow.
Absolutely.
It's just got to be such an incredible feeling. I understand now what you mean by that. Now, do you go to school for this at any point, or do you just learn on the job? Because you said you were studying hieroglyphics. You got flashcards or what?
I did go to school. It's funny. I loved what I was doing as a kid. Obviously, I was really lucky to be in that industry and discovering things. And my job is taking me to places that no one has discovered before. Every new discovery, I'm there first. So I was enjoying it so much that I did not want to go to college or university. I just wanted to keep doing it.
You
And
kind of already had the dream job, though. Like, people go to school for that, get a PhD, and then they start where you're doing what you're doing at age 11.
that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
And in Egypt, if you do not go to university, you're considered uneducated, nearly illiterate.
Sure.
So it's a thing that you have to do. So I thought about it. I was like, what university can I go to that is easiest, that I don't have to worry about, that I might not even go physically be there, so I can keep doing what I'm doing? And I thought, wait, all the professors of archaeology, I get them in to interview them. They love me. They know me. If I go to archaeology school, I can bet I can pass because I have an in with all the professors. So I'm gonna go to archaeology school,
Right.
and I did. It was a five-year school, and you learn about hieroglyphs and ancient Egyptian history all the way through. We have modern history of Egypt, which is anything 2,000 years, and that's modern
That's
history.
so
which is
funny that
2,000 years
modern
ago.
history is just a mere, the last 2,000 years, everything else is old.
Everything else is
Yeah.
old. And then, of course, a year into it, I learned so much more than I thought I knew. And then the passion starts kicking in because the stories are so fabulous,
Sure.
and the drama in the stories too is so fascinating. The father marrying his daughter, and the son killing his father. It's like
Yeah.
Game of Thrones.
It's like Game of
Egypt.
Thrones and the Bible, except it's,
Yes, so
not
it's
fiction.
So it's so fascinating that I ended up being completely obsessed, and I finished with straight A's, aside from the fact that I knew the professors.
Yeah, aside from that. But this is kind of like you wanted. This is like the lazy route for you, right? It's like when you take French as your major, but then your parents are both from Paris. And you're just like, I see what you're doing.
Yes,
I see what you're doing. Here.
That's exactly what I did.
Like, oh, I probably don't even have to show up to class. This is going to be great.
Yes.
Yeah. I heard you're a beast at math, though, as well. Why not study that if that's so easy for you and interesting?
Well, I love math. Math is my toy. I enjoy math so much.
I cannot relate.
I know. My wife says the same thing, but I enjoy it so much that it is my hobby. The fun time I have, I sit and do math puzzles. My kid is like, I have 3 kids, and my youngest is like me. You give him an iPad, and he opens the calculator app, and he stays on it for 30 minutes at a time.
Really?
But that's how I felt.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I loved the numbers. I loved combining numbers when I was a kid. I loved all that stuff. That I remember at school, my parents would say, "Okay, you got to stop studying math, and you can only do it on your off time." And that was the thing. I only did math on my off time because I enjoyed it so much. Yet math professors hated me because I also enjoyed finding their mistakes all the time. I was the kid that they kicked out of class all the time. But I love math. I love math games. I love poker. It's all math, and I'm sorry if you don't feel the same way.
No, it's I would love to. I'm not judging it. It's just that, man, was I not good at it. And so when you're not good at something like that, it becomes something you develop almost a fear of at that point. And it's funny because I was in honors math, but I was the worst kid in honors. So I was like, I'm not good at this. And then I do math elsewhere, and I'm like, oh, this is not hard. But then after that in college, I had roommates that were all studying accounting and stuff. So I'd always go, you guys handle the check and just tell me what I owe. So I'm a product of that environment where
you were the best of the, you were the worst of the best.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is much better than most.
Right, but you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you were an Olympic athlete, but you always came in dead last, never medaled. You're just like, I suck at this.
But
it's like, well, you're still in the Olympics, buddy. Yeah. So archaeology is math. Do you apply the math to your work as an archaeologist?
One of my obsessions in archaeology is applying the math and the timeline of archaeology. It's funny because ancient Egypt is mentioned in so many different sources of history. One of the sources is obviously on the ancient Egyptian walls.
Sure.
But one other very famous source that everyone has read is the Bible.
Yeah.
And if you consider the Bible just a historical book and nothing else, and of course it's religious and emotional and stories, so the history is not made for history. The history is not completely right, but it mentions ancient Egypt and it mentions stories that took place in ancient Egypt. Yet, no one has been able to align both histories. The Bible does not align with ancient Egyptian history as we know it. We don't know when Exodus happened, if it happened, or when it would have taken place. So one of my obsessions is to align those timelines, to try and find the similar stories. Because here's what I personally believe. I personally believe that the Bible stories, whether completely true or not, they were always inspired from true stories, at least. Right? That's how everything in history is like that. Even ancient Egyptian history itself, the stories are not completely true.
Well,
The
yeah,
stories that are written on the walls.
Sure.
We've seen King Ramesses winning this battle and destroying the Hittites and the Phoenicians, and we go to the Phoenicians and the Hittites' temples, and they have destroyed the ancient Egyptian. History is written by the winners and by their writers, right? So the Bible is also an example of that, where the stories in there could be inspired from real stories if they're not completely true. Now, there are very similar stories in the Bible and in ancient Egypt in history as we see it, which can be a theory that a lot of like mainstream and strict archaeologists would shy away from. But I find it fascinating. There's a story about a king named Akhenaten. You would know him because he is King Tut's dad. But he was a rebel. He was a rebel that left ancient Egypt as we know it and decided that all the gods of ancient Egypt didn't matter, and there was only one God that matters. And it's the God with the power behind the sun disks.
This is Ra?
The god Eton.
Okay.
Ra was the sun disk itself.
Oh, okay.
God Eton was a newer god, and it was just the power behind the sun disk. He was closest, Akhenaten, King Akhenaten, was closest to what people believe in today, the power behind the sun disk somewhere. And only one god. Ancient Egyptians had many, many gods, but he said only one God. He decided to leave the capital of Egypt, Luxor, Thebes, where the Valley of the Kings is, and move somewhere else. And he took his followers with him, and he crossed the Nile to the other side where people are not supposed to be. Only the dead are on the other. The Nile splits ancient Egypt between the living on the east and the dead on the west. All the tombs are on the west because that's where the sun sets for the living but rises for the dead and for their day. And the east is where the sun rises for the living, and that's where the temples that they pray in. But Akhenaten went and crossed the Nile to the other side, decided to put everything on the west and for the living and the tombs on the east. So he just crossed wires. Everything was very different. And he was very hated back in the capital, Thebes, where all the priests of him, all the strong religious leaders were completely against him, and they're very influential because he's basically deciding that they don't matter also.
He's going to eliminate your job. You're going to figure out a reason to get rid of him,
And they're very, very influential and very strong. Akhenaten goes to a place and says, I find this place. This is the promised land, as written in ancient Egyptian text. This is the promised land, and I will be here. And he decides that this is the new capital and builds the capital there. Akhenaten disappears at some point. He gets probably killed by the ancient Egyptian army that went back and took his son King Tut and brought King Tut back to Thebes. And King Tut then changed his name to King Tut-Ankh-Emen as we know him today, but his name was King Tut-Ankh-Eton, which is the god that his father.
Interesting.
So he changed his name and became a part of ancient Egypt. But if you look at the Bible as well, who else believed in one God?
Right.
Took his people and his followers and crossed a reed. And actually, if you in the Torah, it never says the Red Sea where Moses crossed. It actually says a sea of reed. A body of water with reed. That's the actual translation. The Red Sea is actually a mistake.
Reeds is in the plants?
Yes. The Red Sea was a mistake that we currently think about today, but it was never the Red Sea, even in the books.
This is like a Moses parable then.
There's a lot of parallels with Moses and Akhenaten. Very similar stories there. And he did. The army followed him, and he crossed the Nile, and he kind of defeated the first wave of the army. All these parallel stories are there. There's another story with Imhotep, the guy that invented the idea of a pyramid. He came, his name is Imhotep, which means I come in peace. sounds alieny, but it's not. He
Yeah,
just
somebody told me to ask them, like, ask him about the I Come in Peace story. It's amazing. And I was like, it's going to turn into some alien shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Imhotep was not an Egyptian, and he ended up becoming the second-hand man to the king, translating the king's stories of the days of famine ahead, which is very similar to the Bible story of Joseph of the Bible and his brothers. If you remember the story of Joseph of the Bible with his brothers, when Joseph was the youngest brother, that his dad loved him more than the rest of his brothers, and then his brothers took him aside and killed a sheep and went back with his clothes and said, "Dad, we lost Joseph, he's dead," but they sent Joseph to Egypt, and then Joseph became the second-hand man to the king, translated stories to the king about famine, and became the strongest. That's a very similar story to Imhotep as well. So all these stories kind of align between the Bible and ancient Egypt. And I'm working on a project right now, very, very secretive on my side.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to finish the alignment of religious history and ancient Egyptian
That's going to
history.
go over pretty well, I think, because a lot of people want to believe that stuff anyway. And that's always a good market to hit.
I agree, but I worry. Because also with religious history, it is religious.
Yeah.
And people don't want.
That's true. Some people are going to think, who is this guy to change or try to change people's beliefs?
They want to talk about the Bible as a holy book, not as a history book.
That's a good point. And you're Christian as well. So before people get those angry letters, is it a Coptic Christian? What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. I know it's a type of Christianity, but I have no idea what.
Correct. I am a Coptic Christian, born Coptic Christian in Egypt. And Coptic Christianity is specifically Egyptian Orthodox Christianity. The word Coptic actually means Egyptian. It comes from the word Egypt, Gyptos, in Greek, Gyptos Coptic. So the Coptic actually means Egyptian, but it became that sect of Christianity, which is very strict. And growing up, it was always called the original Christianity, is because when Jesus was in Egypt,
as one does.
Yeah. So, but it's also very strict. We had a very, very strict Christianity. You had to fast most of the year.
Most of the year?
Most of the year was fasting. Oof. Yeah, every Wednesday, a lot of fasting took place. And my uncles are priests. My uncles are priests. So I grew up as an altar boy too. So I'm very Christian before anyone starts.
They put you to work, dude. Altar boy, mine shaft, or ancient, tomb shaft explorer, fixer. You had no free time. No wonder you weren't good at soccer.
That's the issue. Math was my free time.
Yeah, man. I'm getting a picture of your childhood here.
It was great. It was a great childhood.
No, it sounds awesome. It just sounds very unique.
Yeah. I didn't go to parties. I want to go to parties now. Maybe that's what I should do now.
I don't think so. Okay. I'm 42. I don't know how old you are, but parties they're overrated.
They're very hard.
Yeah, ancient Egypt over parties any day. So, okay, I realize how silly this question is, but in the movies, they often show someone getting a crazy illness after going into a tomb. I'm not asking if there's a mummy's curse or whatever, but it does seem plausible that you could get sick after going into what's essentially a grave full of water. Even if it's hundreds and hundreds of years old, there's got to be some crazy mold in there or whatever. I mean, it seems very possible, or some gross spiders. I don't know. Maybe they don't live that far down there.
I can't diss the curse of the mummies too much for multiple reasons. Reason number one is that there is actually truth to it, chemically, scientifically. There is truth to it, the curse of the mummies. It's not an actual curse that comes out and attacks you.
Yeah, you're going to have to qualify that.
Yeah, of course. It's not an actual ghost of King Tut that comes out. But leaving a tomb closed for 1,000 years with live organic material inside, and then opening it for the first time, going inside, is not healthy.
The air itself is just stale.
There's mold that has been building, and it's not healthy. Yeah. You're very likely, if you take that first breath in, and people didn't wear masks back at the time when they're finding these things, they're very excited. People having very hard time wearing masks today when they know there's a pandemic out. So
you think anti-mask is strong now? Try it.
So a lot of that happened. People died after opening tombs for the first time. Chemically, it makes sense. Now, I also can't diss the curse of the mummies too much, because I think I've been cursed at some point in my life.
How's that?
I was on my show, Mummies Unwrapped.
I see what you did there.
On Discovery Channel. It's a great show. But I was on my show, Mummies Unwrapped, and I was in Egypt, and I was at a tomb in Amarna. Amarna is the place where Akhenaten had built the city, the new city he had built.
I see. Okay.
And it's in ruins today, and it looks like it's been in ruins for a long portion of time because it got destroyed by ancient Egyptians. But they're finding new tombs there every day. But most of the tombs they find, they close, and they never open them again. Not much people go to Amarna. And if those tombs were in a city with no history, they would be the most visited tombs ever.
Yeah.
But next to the Great Pyramids of Giza and King Tut's tomb, no one goes there. I went there because I was trying to know more about Akhenaten. I went inside that tomb, and that tomb literally has not been opened for 600 years or so.
Oh, wow.
They know all the guards that have been there, never opened it. And there was a story I was following, and I wanted to go inside. A guard comes in, wake him up from his bed,
Sure, yeah.
find his key. Key's lost somewhere. They have to break the lock to let me in. And the first thing he does after breaking the lock, he actually goes, 1 second, I have to knock on the door. And I was like, dude, come on.
Pretty sure there's nobody in there.
I'm pretty sure nobody's in there. He's like, no, I'm not talking about people. And I'm like, he's going to go about the ghosts. He's like, I'm not talking about ghosts. Ghosts are elsewhere. He believed in ghosts, but not in there. He said they're snakes.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
I was like, oh, yeah. I was making fun of you there for a second, but please knock on that door as much as you want. He does knock on the door, and you hear the snakes rattling and coming out, and he knows what he's doing. So he knocks on the door a couple of times before opening it. So when he opens it, the snakes don't jump out. When he opens it, the snakes know. And he then opens the door, and we back up a second, snakes come out of different types. They were living next to each other. Snakes love.
Ancient Egypt had the asp, right?
Yeah,
is that a real
cobra.
snake?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
In crossword, they call it the asp all the time. It's the Egyptian cobra, which is the version of the asp. But yeah, and I don't like snakes.
No,
I'm not sure
nobody
about
does.
you.
Well, not nobody. Very few people do.
Yeah, they're sick people.
Especially in enclosed spaces.
Yeah. But we get them all out, and then we go inside and start filming, and I go under that tube, and I find things, and I'm breathing really heavy and everything, and there's bats inside, and the smell is so horrible. And I left that tomb. I did not feel well.
Is it just a moldy smell?
Bats. There's bats.
Bat guano smell?
So there's that ammonia smell, that ammonia bat urine smell, along with, there's been snakes in there, along with this just very strange smells all going in, and your body is telling you, stop breathing, this is not good. And the dust is collecting all that stuff coming up because we're walking in there for the first time. All this dust has settled. We're just walking, bringing it up. And I'm like, I'm a host on Discovery Channel. I'm yelling at the camera and being very excited. And I'm breathing all this crap in.
Literally crap, probably.
Literally.
Yeah, snake and bat crap.
Yes. And maybe the curse of the mummies mixed in. And then we leave. And literally a day later, I was in a horrible shape in bed. I had fevers that went up to 107.
Whoa, aren't you supposed to die before that point, actually? That's terrible.
Absolutely. We had doctors coming in. I thought I was coughing blood. I was hallucinating, and my kids and my wife traveled with me around the world.
Sure.
My wife was really, really scared for me, and I don't know how I survived it. That was late 2019, just 6 months maybe before COVID or something. Never know. Maybe I brought it out of the tomb. But the reason I'm telling you the story is because it is true. The scientific curse of the mummies is very true. I just opened a tomb that was closed for only 600 years, let alone for the 6,000 years one.
Sure.
And I was in a horrible shape the next day. So the curse of the mummies do exist scientifically.
Wow. It seems like that's really a bad fever. I mean, you must have just inhaled a lot of. Did they figure out that it was, hey, you inhaled a bunch of essentially shit dust and it just coated your lungs and infected your lungs?
They none of the doctors really knew what I had. They put me on a bunch of antibiotics, and I explained to them all where I was.
Sure.
And they said, well, bats, snakes, dust is not a very good combination for whatever it is. It could be anything. We have not seen this combination of symptoms, but hopefully these antibiotics work. And they worked.
Thank God.
I'm alive.
Lucky you.
I'm here today.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show.
You came back with something else growing on you after one of your shoots, namely the woman who became your wife.
Well, that's the final reason I cannot diss the Curse of the Mummies.
That's right.
It was 2009, and I was doing a show for Sci-Fi Channel called Destination Truth with Josh Gates. Josh Gates still does shows today on Discovery Channel Expedition Unknown. He's a very funny man. He's a good friend of mine. But we were doing an episode about the Curse of the Mummies, King Tut's tomb specifically, and one of the crew members was a very nice, annoying woman that had a fight with the day she landed in Egypt because she was fighting me over equipment and serial numbers. She remembers that story better than I do. But it took 3 days, and she was in love with me.
But not the other way around. Gotcha. I'm sure she remembers the story a little differently.
It took 3 days. We liked each other a lot, and then she had to leave after Egypt, go to Bhutan,
cool.
and which is a beautiful country, and then back to LA where I was already there waiting for her. We spent 4 months together, and I asked her to marry me. 4 months in. That's all it took. She came to Egypt looking for the Curse of the Mummies, and guess what she found.
She got it. Yeah. So you guys decided to live together in Egypt, which I have to say is quite a move for her, especially because I don't know a ton about Egypt, of course, but to be a white woman that moves from Los Angeles and is like, yeah, cool, let's live in Egypt. She's not moving to France. There's a big culture shock. There's a lot of different things that she has to get used to, I would imagine, in a place like that.
Absolutely. Egypt is not bad as you think, I have to say. You watch a lot of news on here in the U.S., and it could sound like Egypt is this horrible place to be in. But the reality is, if you're having a happy life in Egypt, you're living like a king.
Sure.
And it was a part of the problem, and it is a part of the problem. I was happy in Egypt. I had a very happy life. I lived in a beautiful palace with people that helped in the house. It sounds horrible, but that was the life you get in a country where there's discrepancy between people.
Big wealth gap,
massive wealth gap, and that's what a lot of people here in the U.S. try to fight and make sure that never happens, because that destroys every part of society. Egypt has that. Egypt has a massive wealth gap. There's really rich people, and there are a lot of 90-some% very poor.
Oh wow, it's that bad. I didn't realize it was that big of a gap.
Yeah, and the rich are living on yachts and having very fancy cars, and they have very nice houses. But also, Egypt is a tourist destination, and everyone knows that Egypt's economy is based on tourism.
Sure.
So they have to appeal to tourists. So you could go to Egypt as a foreigner, as a tourist, and be very respected and very happily going around. You can do whatever you want. You go drink. If you get caught with drugs, that people are going to let you go. You're never going to be at fault.
Not going to try that one.
As
but I'll
a
take your word.
yes, you're never going to be at fault as a foreigner in Egypt, because the relations matter so much. The way Egypt looks as a tourist destination has to stay that way. That's why any terrorist attack was always a massive problem economically for Egypt, because tourists do not come. And tourism is the second source of income for Egypt after the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is the massive gate between, right? And both of them are based on stability of the country.
Right. That's a good point.
So any terrorist attack is a massive problem. That's why after the military took over the country in the most latest phase of ruling of reign, which I can't even talk about too much for obvious reasons.
Because you have to go back to Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's different. You can't talk anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask questions, and if you can't answer it, just say, "Hey, man, now to get, we'll just move on." But I'd like to talk about the Arab Spring a little bit, if possible.
Historically, I can talk about the Arab Spring. Yes.
Yeah. Historically, we won't comment on current government, whatever. That's not a problem. I completely understand that. But overnight, the country just kind of falls apart, or the government in the country just kind of falls apart. This is 2011 for people who don't know.
Yeah.
Because for those who don't remember / weren't watching the news back then, and who knows, maybe we're 10 years old if they're listening to this at the time. Arab Spring was a series of uprisings and revolutions in primarily Middle Eastern / Arab countries that ended up overthrowing the government of those countries. And Egypt was one of those places where this happened. And the leader, Hosni Mubarak, was the leader for decades and decades. And then he just one day is kind of just gone. Growing up under a leader like Mubarak, right? I assume you think, well, this guy was president when I was born. He's probably going to be president in 100 years from now or after I'm gone, even though that's not really physically possible. Somebody like that, you just think this guy's never going anywhere.
He's God. He was God.
Right.
I
Crazy.
lived all my life under one president. I've seen in the news in countries like America where they have different presidents every 4 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And it was the most fascinating. How is that even possible?
Right. How do they get anything done?
How does a president just let go? How does a president go and shake hands of the next president and say, "Hey,
it's your
won.
problem now."
It's your...
Yeah.
To me, that was just so out there.
Yeah.
I had one president all my life, and that president had elections, but no one would run against him, and he would win by 99.9% of the vote. And sometimes someone would be up against him that gets the 0.1% of the vote. Then that person goes to jail and gets killed.
Jeez.
And that was normal. No one had problems with that. It was just life. It was so far that we could even change that no one had problems with it anymore. They just accepted it. And I lived my life that way. That when I married my wife in 2009 and she moved to Egypt, and we had our daughter, Sophia, she was 6 months old then when the revolution started. My wife is white, my wife is half Jew, and my wife is very different looking than Egyptians.
Sure.
My daughter is as well. A protest starts boiling up on the streets on January 25th, 2011. And I think to my wife, this is beautiful. Students are going out.
Yay, revolution.
It's so lovely to have protests and people speaking freely about what they want. And it started not against the president, because that's too far-fetched to even say. It started because one kid was brutally treated by the police, tortured by the police for no reason as well, till he died. And he was a 16-year-old kid.
This is like what happened in Iran recently.
Exactly. Just one little thing can spark it. And when the people went out on the streets, my wife was watching, and my wife said, "Hey, I'm not too sure about this." And I said to my wife, "Hey, I'm the expert here. Nothing is going to happen. I've lived here all my life. All these kids will be gathered from the streets, and they'll be in jail, and nothing will ever exist." But social media existed.
Right.
And that was the difference. And that's what I didn't think about. The next day, on Twitter, it was craziness. Everything on Twitter, where everyone is, and everyone is going out on the street. And people can't get the news from TV anymore because TV is the government's at the time.
Yeah.
So everyone is getting their news on Twitter. So the next day, people went out on the street. A lot of people did. And the police started stopping them. Police brutality started happening on the streets.
Yeah.
On Twitter, where people can see it now. Videos are being posted.
I saw a lot of this stuff. It was scary. You'd see a military vehicle just deliberately running young people over, and you're just like, you're angry. You're very angry watching this.
Correct. And
It's
there
horrible.
was a police vehicle. We're going to make a massive difference between the police and the military at that time because they held very different jobs. The military decided to stay on the side, not help the government and not help the people yet, because they are a different branch of the government.
Got it.
right?
Okay. Yeah, it just looked like a military, but
Yeah.
it could be militarized police,
But
like a
that's-
SWAT van,
But
basically.
that's what was happening all around. And then the government made the dumbest mistake of their lives by, first of all, not doing anything about it, and instead cutting off the internet,
Yeah.
cutting off Twitter. And that was the day we freaked out. Open our phones, open the internet to check what's happening because we can't know what's happening. And Twitter is out, internet is out. And guess what happens? How can people know what is happening? Is by going out on the street.
Going out on the street, right?
So
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Between
Backfire.
an hour later after they dropped Twitter, an hour later, every human being was on the street. We're a country of 100 million people, a city of 20 million people, Cairo. Everyone was on the street. No police force with weapons. No, and Egyptians are not armed. The civilians are not armed. But no police force with as many weapons as you would want, that also consists of Egyptians,
Sure.
will be able to stop everyone or have the heart
Sure.
to start shooting their fellow Egyptians. So they had no choice but to do something very scary in that country. Take their police costume off and hide.
Yeah, go watch TV in their living room, yeah.
Which means an hour later, we had a country with no police on the streets.
That's kind of scary.
And that went nuts. It was lawless. The streets were crazy, and the embassy called my wife on the phone. My wife is a U.S. citizen, so the embassy called all the U.S. citizens that knew that they lived in Egypt and told my wife, hey, it's time. It's about to get much worse in an hour. We have a plane going out to Cyprus, and from Cyprus you can find your own way that leaves in 2 hours. You need to go now. She then asked them about our daughters, Sophia and me. She said, my husband and my daughter are with me. And they said, do they have American citizenships or residence? And I never applied. I never planned. I never planned to go somewhere else. I wanted to. We were living in Egypt for the rest of my life. My daughter is an American citizen by birth because she was born to an American citizen. So she said, yes, my daughter has it, but my husband only has a visa. I had a travel visa. And he said he cannot come on that plane. My wife, I remember that it was, she didn't think about it. She responded and said, don't count us in. We'll find our own way out instantly. She said, I'm not leaving you.
You must have been like, get out of here. At least I can blend in.
Wanted nothing but for them to get out.
Hell yeah.
But she said that there's no way I'm leaving you behind. My wife is badass.
Yeah,
dude.
she's badass. But I know my wife, she would be like, Pete, good luck, man.
And
it's for the safety of our child. Bye.
I'm
not sure if she can hear me.
I could see her still smiling even though she can't hear you because
she can hear me. Okay, she can. Yeah.
And then we started our own venture into leaving the country at the time, and the country was a complete mess at the time because there's another sect of the country called the Muslim Brotherhood.
I was going to ask about the Muslim Brotherhood because they kind of commandeered the revolution, and it was like, hey, we're revolution, and then they were like, actually, let's make this some Islamic extreme kind of deal.
You put it exactly how it was. They did not start the revolution, and they were always the little opposition that was kind of illegal, but kind of not.
Right.
And we don't have healthy opposition in Egypt, of course, because it's a dictatorship. So the only surviving opposition was an opposition that could use religion. But the Muslim Brotherhood are not like Muslims. All my friends were Muslim. I grew up with Muslim friends all the way through. 90% of the country are Muslim, so my best friends are Muslims. But the Muslim Brotherhood, they used religion to become the Muslim Brotherhood. So people with less education could believe that they are the way. But the one thing worse than fascism is religious fascism.
Theocracy, yeah.
It is horrible. The Muslim Brotherhood took over the revolution really quickly because they were the only organized opposition. The army stepped in to protect the people and decided to side with the people at the time. the president of the country, Hosni Mubarak, 16 days in, decided to step down.
Interesting. That must have been kind of jarring. Like, wait a minute, you're leaving?
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. I had already left the country at the time. I was with my wife in Syracuse, New York, at my father-in-law's. And when we left the country, we were thinking we were going to go back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then he came out and he resigned. Hosni Mubarak resigned.
Yeah. I mean, and like, to go back to your original point, you're a Christian, you've got a white wife who's and you're living in this upper class or upper middle class, whatever neighborhood in Egypt. Not a great look when Islamic fundamentalists take over the country and the military or the police apparatus or whatever their goals were at the time, which was probably everything.
Between a day and night, all of a sudden, white people became spies, Christians became infidels, rich people became ex-regime, and I was the three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you checked every box.
I checked every box, and it just wasn't safe for my daughter anymore. It wasn't, and Egypt is home.
Yeah,
dude, Egypt was home. I never thought I was ever going to leave. My wife left the greatest country in the world to come be with me in Egypt because that's where we're spending the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And between a day and night, it just goes away.
Crazy. It really sounds like what Iranians who left in 1979 say about their country. Like, wait a minute, we went from secular, and they had the problems because, they had the Shah and everything.
Yes.
But it was like,
exactly.
Whoops. Then suddenly you're faced with the prospect of becoming like Iran.
Yes.
No, thank you.
Yes. And that's a part of the reason why you can't judge what's happening in Egypt right now. Because they have made a decision, and the people have made that decision, to not let the Muslim Brotherhood stay.
Mm-hmm.
And they were willing to go as far as, let's let the military take over the country again and not have the Muslim Brotherhood. Because Egyptians are not like the rest of a lot more conservative parts of the Arab world. Egyptians do like fun. They like having fun. They like going out, smoking hookah pipes on the streets. The women are stronger. The women go out on the streets wearing skirts. They don't want that taken away from them. And that's why within a year of the Muslim Brotherhood rule, people went back out on the streets.
Sure.
In numbers bigger than bigger than January 25th. And the army sided with the people again, and then performed a coup. And you could have never called it a coup at the time because it was a big no. Don't say that.
Sure.
It's the people's revolution. But it's technically a coup because of the people. It's
right. Well, I mean, hey, y'all got a sneak preview of the Islamic Republic 2.0,
correct.
And everybody went, nah, it's not really.
It was quick, too.
Yeah.
The things on TV, people coming out on TV saying how, anything else other than Muslims are infidels. Women that have their hair showing on the street deserve to be burning in hell.
Oh God,
It was so quick from a country where we're in bikinis on the Red Sea, drinking tequilas and having fun, to if your hair is showing, you're going to burn in hell, and you better cover every part of your body.
And also, man, if your economy depends on tourism, you know what's bad for tourism? Islamic fundamentalists.
Yes.
Not great for tourism.
Very much indeed.
Or religious fundamentalists in general who won't let you do anything. So you're stuck during this protest initially, right? So, and I know you spent the night in a food storage locker, which is kind of hard to imagine. What is that, like a big walk-in refrigerator kind of thing?
Well, we lived in a 3-story home that was... It was beautiful. I'll show you pictures of it. It's beautiful, beautiful home. And it's Roman style. So the top story is a vault shaped, like a pyramid shape, basically. The top story.
You love your pyramids.
I love my pyramids. And when the revolution started, when the embassy called my wife on the phone, the embassy knew that something was going to happen that was worse than what we were watching, and that's when the police left and the country fell apart. And if Los Angeles has no police on the streets,
well,
a very safe, not safe, but a very civilized and first world city, one day later, it's going to be a place that you want to hide with your gun somewhere.
Sure. I mean, you've seen the videos of the LA riots probably at some point.
Exactly.
It's going to look something like that.
So now, no police in Egypt, Cairo. There's a lot of bad people out there, and they target rich neighborhoods first. The neighborhood I lived in was the same neighborhood that the son of the president was in.
Oof.
It was a nice, fancy neighborhood, and we lived on 16 acres of mango trees, and it was just beautiful with our pool and our bubble. I lived in a bubble that I
Sure.
didn't see what was happening
gated
at all.
community,
It was
yeah.
a gated community. It's lovely, lovely place. But it was a part of the problem. That later story.
Sure.
Anyway, of course, very quickly, people started jumping the gates and they were going to attack all these
Oh, my
places.
gosh.
And I have my wife and my daughter, and I don't know the art of fighting very well. I lived a very privileged...
Wouldn't matter if you did, man.
But I
Yeah.
don't know what to do. My wife, on the other hand, she said, let's go inside the food storage locker, which was our third story. It's a room about the size of the podcast room here,
The
which
studio
is
here?
which is
Okay.
what? Yeah, it's
I
not a
don't know.
small
This
room.
is like 10 by it's not, it's like a dorm room. It's like a college dorm room for people
Yes.
that are trying to envision this. Not a place where you want to spend more than a few days with no bed, no.
Well, but it's also full of pantry, which is a good place to hide in if
Sure.
you're trying to hide. So we went inside that room and we put
Oh, man.
the deep freezers in front of the door,
I see.
so no one can access that room. Even if they came in, they can take everything in the house, but they can't take my wife or my daughter or hurt us. And there was only one circular window at the top that's accessible. So my wife just goes into action so quickly. She had gathered sand from the land,
Sand.
and she put it in a pot with oil on it, and she started boiling oil and sand.
Wait a minute. This is some medieval siege type shit.
And with my wife, you don't want to anger
What?
my wife, trust me.
Nah, she'll
Yes,
Braveheart. You can go
scary,
Braveheart on
scary
your ass.
place.
Yeah.
But she then boiled sand and oil and got it ready, because anyone that tries to climb that one access window, if she pours the sand and oil, the sand apparently will stick to you
Oh
till
my
you
God.
burn to death.
Oh my God. That really is like Braveheart.
Yes.
This is some siege warfare. But I would imagine at the time you are boiling sand and oil for home defense, you're pretty freaking terrified.
It's my daughter. That's the reason, really.
Yeah, yeah,
Because at the end of the day, at some point I felt I should go out on the street and be with the people.
yeah.
Now, of course, I don't know if I would have ever done that, whether I had the family or not. But none of that matters. All you're thinking about, really, you
Yeah,
have kids.
I do.
You know
Yeah.
how it works now.
Mhm.
It's like all of a sudden, I'm a young, selfish person, and you're a young, selfish person, and then you have kids, and
Yeah,
your
just-
selfishness becomes more about your family. You're still selfish,
Sure.
but you're selfish for more
It
people.
includes them.
Yes.
Yeah, it includes them.
And then your child, you go into that, I think it's biological. I mean,
Mhm.
it's natural, the instinct of you want to protect that child from anything. So that's all I can think about. How can we save her? And it was very scary.
So okay, at that point though, you didn't have to throw boiling hot oil and sand on anybody, hopefully.
We did not. She was very excited about it, but we did not.
Yeah, once in a lifetime
Yeah.
opportunity. But then you've got to get out of there still.
Yeah.
You're stuck in there. So how do you find your way out of this mess? I mean, people are hopping the gates. It's time to bug out.
Well, the next, the next morning, we decided to find our own way out. Get in our car and drive straight to the airport to get out. Now, I know everyone is going to the airport, everyone is trying to get out, but also I know the streets are the worst place to be on right now. Even to get to the airport is the scariest thing to do, because what happened at the time when police abandoned the country is that everyone started creating their own vigilante groups.
Sure, like neighborhood militia kind of things.
Yeah. So every neighborhood, 17-year-olds will go out on the street, create a checkpoint to make sure anyone that enters that neighborhood is trusted.
Mm.
But there's problems with that strategy, with that structure, is that first, every neighborhood has different ideology of
Sure.
what is trusted or what is safe.
Oh man.
And also, 14 to 17-year-olds are not the best judges of character.
No.
Including myself. I'm
Yeah.
not judging them, but they're
Slightly
not.
impulsive group of guys, generally.
Impulsive is the correct word. They act before they think, and we're hearing on the radio incidences of people stopping at the checkpoint and everyone getting killed in the
Oh,
car.
man.
Now, my wife, white, half Jew, my daughter in the backseat, 6-month-old. I put a veil on my wife's head, I remember.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
I said, just so you can look less white, I guess.
Yeah.
We didn't have a veil.
It's an emergency situation. Yeah. No, we can't be PC about this.
Yeah. So, and it was, we didn't have a veil. We used a baby's blanket. It was a baby's blanket. It looked like a veil, but I used the baby blanket. She put the veil on top of her head. And we're driving through neighborhoods to get to the airport. Now, I know my neighborhoods. I knew the neighborhoods well. I know that I could stop at that checkpoint and this neighborhood will look at us and they're like respectable people. You can go. But there is that one neighborhood before we get to the airport that I know is very much Muslim Brotherhood leaning neighborhood. And to them, trusted and safe is not the same thing.
Right. It's definitely not a Christian dude with a white wife in a car.
No, and it's not even a respectable, just like normal guy. It's more of really high energy kids that have been fed that Muslim Brotherhood is the way and that kill everyone else is the way. And they believe that they are doing this for the good of the world.
Right.
You know, and you're getting into that place.
They're righteous at that point.
Yes, they are the ones. No one else was going to kill these people other than us. We're going to save the world. So it gets into their head and they act. So before that neighborhood, I do remember the story. I remember it very well. I could see it. Before that neighborhood, we're in the car. My wife in the back seat, my daughter in the far right back seat, in the car seat. We're driving, and I see the checkpoint that I see that checkpoint the neighborhood has created. And a bunch of 14, 16-year-old kids. And I see a kid with a sword walking towards...
A sword?
Well, they're using whatever they have.
Sure, I guess that makes sense.
And there was a sword.
Sorry, it's just so ridiculous.
I know, and everything on that day, looking at the streets, it looks like a scene out of the movie. Like it is just unbelievable. There's fire, donkey carts driving the wrong way, and Egyptian streets on a normal day are crazy.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like normal rush hour traffic in Egypt.
This was it's just really crazy day. And a kid with a sword is approaching the car, pointing up with the sword, using it as a pointing up and saying, "Hey, stop! We're checking the car."
Yeah, no, thank you.
And I look back at my wife, and I said to her, "Baby, we're not stopping." And she looks back at me. She's like, "Do you do what you think is right?" And I remember after I made a decision. I'm not going to stop.
Yeah.
And I know, I remember my thoughts that I know that the decision I just made, what it means and how my body is going to act. And I started training myself and all that within they're 100 meters away. That's
I mean, you're going to run these guys over if they don't move, right?
Yeah. And I remember my mental, my brain was training my body what to do. Because, if you're driving a car and you hit something by mistake, before you think to stop, your body has stopped you on the brakes.
Sure.
Right? So I was trying to tell myself to not stop. I was trying to tell myself, don't keep hitting the gas.
Yeah. Wow.
My child is in the back.
Right.
Jordan.
Yeah,
it's just, I had to make that decision at the time. And I remember I started driving and I looked the kid straight in the eye, all his friends around, and I started increasing my speed. I looked him in the eye and I'm begging him without talking, begging him to jump away because I'm gonna kill him. And I remember I drove straight and he raised his sword up and he started yelling, seeing me coming at him now, started yelling at his friends and he raised his sword up and I'm going and he scrapes the side of the car, falls on the sidewalk. His friends start gathering and I hit through their checkpoint And I go all the way through. You hear one of his friends had a pistol, fired the pistol up in the sky, and the kid started running with the swords, but I'm gone. I'm out of there. I think I did not hurt him.
Sure.
Maybe I hurt him, but I don't think I killed him.
Yeah.
He stood back up and he ran.
Wow.
And we were out. We left straight. We went to the airport, and the airport was a complete mess.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Everyone is trying to get out of the airport, but a part of my job was airports. I got gear in and out of the country legally through airports, so I knew all the people in charge. I knew them. So when we went,
the security guys and stuff like that.
I knew everyone in the airport because I have to get gear in and out. And there's a culture in Egypt. I can't say the word here because it's so horrible. But it's a culture of thank you with money.
Is it called bakshish?
Yes.
Yeah, I learned that word in Egypt.
Yes,
bakshish.
but
It's like a tip, but it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more of a spin on it.
Yes, but really, like you're not. These people are not taking this money and building palaces. They're literally going to buy dinner for their children because of it. They're underpaid. So it's a culture of thank you with money. I mean, a lot of people will be shocked by you going to a restaurant and paying a tip at the end of the day after paying the bill. Right? But in America, that is the culture.
Yeah.
It's a very similar thing, but in Egypt, you do it with everyone.
Right. Some people might say it's a bribe, but it's not. It's a tip.
It's not a bribe.
It's a bakshish.
I mean, in definition, maybe it's a bribe, but who cares about dictionaries?
Culturally, it's different.
Yes.
We'll leave it there.
Yes, this is not.
It's not a bribe. It's a bakshish.
Yes, this is not
trademark.
But I knew everyone, and everyone is, they're family, like we're friends. We go in, and the airport is a mess. Lines till forever. We go into the Egypt Air office. And they can't use their credit card machine because...
I was going to say, how do you buy a ticket?
The internet is off.
Yeah.
The government cut off internet, so the credit card machine is not working. So they try to use the phone to give the credit card with a bank. And of course, all the banks the phones are busy. Like that's the only thing working, a landline phone.
Right.
So that's not working. And my wife, again, she just a week before anything had ever taken place, we had a couple of $1,000 in cash that I just brought in. Cash is normal in Egypt. It's not anything strange. Everything is paid in cash, and the credit cards weren't really a thing. So you pay your invoices in cash, and you have money with you, and you put them in the bank, and then bring money out and pay with them.
Sure.
So I had $2,000 in cash with me, and she said, "Hey, let's just keep those in cash here. You never know." And I was like,
"Just two? Is it $2,000? You said
it was $5,000.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but let's just call it $2,000.
Okay, we'll call it $2,000.
It's getting too much right here.
Sure.
But she said, let's just keep them on the side, just in case. And I was like, baby, come on. The ideas you come up with. No. We're not going to keep them on the side. What are we going to do with those cash? We just leave them? They're going to rot. Rats are going to eat them. We're going to hide them under. She said, just let's leave them. I was like, fine. She has no clue in my head. And then I was the one that had no clue, obviously.
Yeah.
Because we had that money with us. And when we go to the Egypt Air desk and they can't buy us a ticket with any credit card or a phone call, we had that money and they said, there's only two seats open on the whole flight that is supposedly going to New York on that day. And it's $4,000. And we're like, we'll take it. Our daughter was an infant, 6 months. She could ride on our lap. Yeah. So we paid, or we had the cash. I was like, we have the cash. And they're like, you have the cash? And they're like, yeah, we have cash. Yeah. So we paid for it right there and right then. We took the tickets. I had the baby and a baby Bjorn right on my chest.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Got one of those, the chest carrier.
They're great. They're great.
Yeah.
Running around at the airport. And then once we had the tickets, we now are walking into security, but no one, this line is not moving. We're going to miss the flight. Yeah. And all the flights are getting canceled and not. And a guy yells from the back, all the flights are canceled. No one needs to come. And I'm like, I can't stay in this line. I took my wife, went through the back door. And the back door is where all the gear comes out. Where all the So I knew the guy. I went in. I was like hoping I know the guy's face. I found the guy and a conversation. Let's call it a conversation.
Sure. Yes, a conversation.
We had a conversation. And then he let us in.
Wow.
Let us in. We went all the way inside. We got straight on the plane. The plane was 1 hour away from taking off, and we made it to the plane. We're very happy. This is the time. Safe. Calm down. The flight attendants said we can't take off because the pilots can't make it to the plane.
Oh no.
So there's half flight attendants, and the plane is empty. There's a 300 passenger plane, probably with 16 people on it.
Oh my god.
Well, no one can make it to the
Because
plane.
the security lines are too
It's just
long.
no one can make it to the plane. And then we stay on that plane for 2 hours, 3 hours. I can't even remember. And then people are trickling in. We're about 30 passengers on the plane. And then the pilot walks in, closes the door, doesn't announce that he's leaving, takes off, and we're up in the air. And a flight attendant comes in and says, "Water or champagne?"
Oh my gosh, champagne for sure.
We went for the champagne and the horse meat, I think it was the meal.
Horse meat?
Yeah, it was champagne and horse meal,
That's-
horse meat.
That's
It's
an
great.
interesting choice of airline food, but
it
I
was
guess you
great.
take what you can.
Yeah.
That must have been the sheer sense of relief. The exhale when the plane is taking off must have felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Although you did leave your house. And where was your car? Where'd you put your car?
We left it. We just left it at
in
the
the road?
airport. Yeah. Well, we had drivers, and I hoped at some point in the future, if no one takes the car, if no one breaks into the car, one of our drivers is going to come pick it up. So
Okay.
I left it at the airport. And
there it is still to this day.
well, it was a couple months later. Someone went and picked it up, and it was still there. I mean, it was broken into and stuff, but it was still there. And
Wow.
yeah, took it back. My parents were in a boat in the middle of the Nile. I tried to call them. My mom was so upset that I was leaving, but their boat started getting attacked by Nile pirates.
I've heard that there are pirates.
They were
On the river.
They were pirates on the Nile, which never existed ever. But it's just people trying to take over. It was a beautiful boat with a hot tub on it, and
Oh, it took over the yacht.
a sail yacht.
A sail yacht with a hot tub.
They're called.
By the
Java,
time
yeah.
you got a hot tub on the boat, it's a yacht.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
And so they stayed on there for 6 months before they were able to land on safe ground.
This is
The
crazy.
country was a complete mess. We left. We went straight to Syracuse to my father-in-law, who housed us. And I thought in my head, it's going to be 3 days, baby. We're going to go back. Everything's going to be fine.
Right.
And my wife goes, "Hey, at this point, you're completely out of touch.
Yeah.
You have no clue what's going on." I was like, "But it's Egypt. I lived here all my life. I just can't imagine. I lived here all my life.
Sure.
I can't imagine it's gone. I cannot imagine. I'm
I-
seeing it."
I get it. That would happen to me here. I'd be like, it's not a revolution. This is America. What are you talking about? It's going to be
Isn't
fine.
that
The police
crazy?
are going to retake control of the city. It's going to be fine.
Right?
How long? And that was, how long did you, how long did that last? That must have been several.
That's a shocking realization there, though.
Yeah.
Would it happen to us here?
I mean, anything can happen.
No, but would it happen to us that we wouldn't see it still and we would not leave?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. You might now have learned your lesson after that first time.
I'm going to tell my wife, "Hey, it's going to be fine. I've lived here for 10 years.
Mhm.
It's completely fine." My wife was going to say, "Let's get out of here."
Let's get out of here. Yeah. Oh my God. So, okay. So were you able to get your money out of the bank in Egypt, or were you just like stuck in Syracuse like, "Hey, Dad, can I borrow some money?" And he's probably like, "I told you not to move to Egypt with that guy."
Her dad was very supportive after our marriage, not before. Of course. I mean, think about it. His girl goes to Egypt
Yeah.
and is going to, "Hey, Dad, I found an Egyptian guy. I'm going to marry him 4 months
He's
in."
a filmmaker.
If
You'll be
this-
thrilled.
yeah. If this was my daughter, I would definitely be very upset. But her dad was very supportive, and we have a great relationship. No, our money was completely stuck in the country.
Sure, right, that's what I thought. Had
The
to be
banks
stuck.
are closed. No one can get money out of the banks. If you're in Egypt, there's a limit to an ATM machine. No one knows the value of the money anymore. That's the other problem. The country is completely, there's no government. So you don't actually know the value of the money. So if you want Egyptian money, how can you convert it to US dollars? We don't know the value of it. Everything is closed and nothing exists.
Oh man.
Because it was valued at every 5 Egyptian pounds were $1 when I left.
Right, and now it's like, well, does Egypt still exist?
Yeah,
Is
so
this
no one
money still
knows.
valid? Yeah. Oh man.
Somehow, though, not being able to access all our money, not being able to access anything, I had one credit card that somehow worked. And I thought it was a mistake or a loop, a problem, but it's working. And we would spend from it, and at the end of the month, they would take it from my bank account. And I don't know how that
That's
worked.
incredible. That's
But it was that one credit card.
really, was it like a Visa or a MasterCard?
It was a
Because
MasterCard.
you got to hand it to them for keeping
It
that
was
thing going.
it was a MasterCard. Yes, thank you, MasterCard. MasterCard.com.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sponsored by nobody, but that's, I mean,
But
you got to give them credit. There's a
it-
revolution, but we got you.
It worked. It worked all the way through, and that's how we lived for the next 3 months. Honestly, as soon as we landed, we stayed in Syracuse for 2 weeks, and when I saw, it was the moment when I saw the president. It was the moment that was the moment for me when the president resigned, because that was the unbelievable for me to
Right.
happen.
That's like
Once that
the
threshold,
dictator steps down.
yeah, I thought, okay, we got to start over. So that's when I applied to have a work permit and a green card in the U.S. Only when the president resigned.
Wow.
I just didn't see it. But when he resigned, that was something that he's a god. Wait, God is gone. And then it struck me, we got to start over.
Yeah.
So I took my wife, my daughter, went straight to LA because that's what I know. I know
Right,
how to
film.
make documentaries. And that's where my wife is from. She works in there. My wife landed, and the next day she was on a show, shooting a show in LA.
Wow.
So she started working. Her credit card is working. It's working great. And I was trying. I kept trying to find a job, which was very hard in LA because
But how is that possible? You have so much experience. You know,
Yeah.
like, hey, I worked in Discovery Channel since I was 11, BBC. Like, they should be like stoked. Most production assistants are like, I smoke weed all day and I'm kind of interested in movies.
there is a saying in LA that I only knew later. If your experience is not in LA, it's no experience. I've had, by the time I was in LA, I was 25, 26, 27 years old. I have already had over 15 years of experience.
Yeah, you'd think
right?
that counts for something.
And none of it mattered in LA. It was just a new place. So I started over. I hate not working. I lived my life working. I didn't go to school the way kids went to school. I enjoyed working. I think I do. I love it.
Mhm.
So, my wife started working straight away, and I was home. So I found a great source on the internet. It's called a Craigslist.
Craigslist, I've
Yeah.
heard of it. Yes,
Yeah.
it's where you can find all kinds of people to clean your house naked or whatever.
Yes, but you can also find Egyptian camera people to come do your quinceañeras.
Yeah. Your quinceañera. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what are you doing, filming bar mitzvahs or something like
I
that?
did, dude.
Yeah.
I did. I would apply for like 1,000 of these jobs because there's like endless list, and 90% of them is fake.
A scam.
Probably. Yeah. But I thank Craig for making his
Mhm.
list. I would apply for like 1,000 of these jobs every week. I did count it once, and it exceeded 2,000 across the time I was applying for those jobs.
Jesus.
And I went filmed. We had a camera with us, so that's what I used. I would go film like a birthday party and edit it, and then take that money and pay it to the babysitter.
Right.
Babysitters in LA was probably a better industry I should have got in. They made so much more money than I did at the time. But then one of these jobs that I did was in a conference. I was filming at a conference. I met a guy, and he's like, "Hey, what do you do?" We talked. He was nice, and he realized that I come from a deep background of documentaries in Egypt. He's like, "I do documentaries all the time. I do one, and I'm doing one next week in the Dominican Republic. I have my team, my DP, and my director already. So, but we'll chat." A week later, he called me. He's like, "Dude, save me. My DP and my director flaked on me because something horrible happened to them. I don't want to mention it now, but can you come to Dominican Republic in a week so we can do a documentary together?" And that was like my first real job.
Wow.
And I was like, "Dude, I'll go anywhere." We went to the Dominican, did a great documentary called Esperanza, which is Spanish for hope.
Mhm.
And it was about microfinancing and how these ladies broke the poverty of cycle, changed their life, changed their whole neighborhood because they got a microloan worth of $200, ended up building all these big
Wow.
businesses. And it's an awesome story, and these are really strong ladies. The women are allowed, the men are not, by the way. In the microfinancing world in Latin America, they don't give money to men
Really?
because of experience. Every time they give money to the men spend it on drinking or whatever it is. They're
Wow.
not responsible. The only ones that are responsible enough are the women, the parents of the women that have kids, because they will do it. And
Wow.
it's a fascinating story. And that was my first Emmy.
So you won an Emmy because you took a bunch of crappy odd jobs off Craigslist.
I mean, Greg, thank you, Greg,
Yeah,
got me an Emmy.
that's great. The
Yeah.
first one, anyway. Yeah.
The first Greg list. Wait, they made another list?
No, the first Emmy.
Oh,
Sorry.
yes, the first Emmy. Yes,
first Emmy.
yes.
Yeah. Do you feel like being so different from Americans, like, especially, look, when you live in LA, and you know this, when you live in LA and you work in production, you're supposed to look like a person who lives behind a dumpster. I guess there's an unwritten rule. Do you think that worked for you somehow, that you didn't look like this?
Like a dumpster?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Like you have to look like a street person with a $1,200 iPhone.
It was a mistake that I did.
Okay.
Actually, when I first came in, I thought I gotta blend in.
Mhm.
I was worried. I was worried about how I'm different.
Mhm.
And I did wear dumpster style clothing.
You did? Oh, so you tried to blend in that way?
Yes, of
Yeah.
course. I wore a t-shirt. It's very strange. I wear the same thing all my life.
Yeah.
My blue shirt and my wife's jeans. My wife's jeans are much more comfortable. Women's jeans are
You're wearing
much
women's
more. Oh
jeans?
my god, yeah, they are so
Secret
they're
safe with me.
stretch. They have the stretch. They're very comfortable.
It's good for crawling around 2,000-year-old tombs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trust me, dude. Go try your wife's jeans when you get back home.
My wife's 5 feet tall, Asian woman, but
Okay.
I'll give it a shot.
Okay, but they're very comfortable. But I wear the same shirt every day, same hat, and that's how I look and that's how I feel. It just works. It works for me. I don't have to think about it. I don't waste time
Sure.
thinking about it. I'm a director, and directors are very. You know how many directors it takes to change a light bulb?
No, I don't. How
It's
many?
4.
4?
No, wait, it's 3. Wait, no, it's 2. Wait, let's go back to 4. They can never make their mind.
Okay.
Right? They always change their mind. So if I had to do that every day, I would just be out of time. So I wear the same thing every day. But when I first came here, I did think I should blend in, and I did. And I did not feel myself all the way through till I stopped. And one day I stopped. I said, I'm going to be myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I wore my stuff again, and I wore my hat again, and I went out on the street, and I felt like I'm doing it. I'm going to do this. And I felt like everyone was looking at me. But then it took 5 minutes of me being worried about it. And then I felt like myself, and I could do what I do. And 9 Emmys later, the blue shirt worked.
The blue shirt worked, man. I mean, you're working with, among other folks, Mark Burnett, who's responsible for Shark Tank. I think Survivor, was that one of his too?
Yeah.
And this is like Hollywood royalty. You're hobnobbing with the best of the best at this point.
Correct, yes.
And then I know you mentioned you're working on Mummies Unwrapped. And one thing that was interesting that you said was, in another interview, was mummies unlock other ancient myths and history, which I thought was kind of fascinating, right? So you discover one thing and somehow they're keys to other parts of history. Can you speak to that a little bit? I think that's really interesting.
Well, I think the key to our future is in our death.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
If you can, people do it today.
Mm-hmm.
You really go through autopsy and you really just make sure you know everything about how this person died, so you can know what happened or what killed him. And the pandemics, you go through it and all that stuff too. You study the dead today. You study the dead to make sure you're prepared for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you look at
thing.
someone's heart and you say, "Wow, he had a heart disease." Well, what did he eat? Right, that kind of.
But now with that technology that we have today, that we study our dead with, we take it back thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
We have the dead thousands of years ago. We have mummies. They're just dead people. They're not toilet paper wrapped ghosts walking around. They're actually dead people with all their biological parts still in there.
I thought they put them in a jar.
What you mean the intestines
organs.
and stuff?
Yeah.
Yes, but their DNA material is still there. Their
Oh, yeah,
skin is
yeah,
still
sure.
there. Their teeth is still there. Their hair is still. You look at those mummies. Some of them look too. They do
Too
look
fresh.
because their skin is still there. Wrinkles on their skin is still there, and all that is DNA evidence. And what archaeologists struggle with all the time is, if I start digging into this mummy today to unlock secrets of the past that would help us in our future, am I doing it too soon? Am I hurting this mummy? Am I getting rid of evidence that I could even know more later with more technology?
Right,
Like,
sure.
think if they started digging into those mummies to find evidence 100 years ago. We would have not had it for the technology we have today.
Right,
Right?
yeah. Sure.
Now, what if we start doing that now? And 100 years from now, we can know so much more with just a little bit of that mummy.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the archaeologist's dilemma all the time. You want to dig, you want to find more, you want to know more about the past. But if you dig now with the tools you have now, you might hurt some of the data that is stored into all these little pieces. Just a grain of sand can tell you more. If you would waited 100 years, today a grain of sand can tell you more than it would have told you 100 years ago.
You can scan it with an electron microscope or
Correct.
something. Yeah.
And carbon dating and all these little tools that is completely lost if you extract it today from the sand.
That makes sense.
But if you extract it today from the sand, then you solve the mysteries today.
That's right.
So it's a massive dilemma that archaeologists have to deal with. But the mummies is literally, I would call them like servers of data that have saved all this information for thousands and thousands of years, and no one touched them because they saved them because they mattered. And today we do have technology good enough to tell us so much about these mummies, so much about the past that we never knew before.
I heard now you use satellite images and things like that to find maybe not pyramids under the sand. Well, yeah, maybe pyramids under the sand, or at least tombs under the sand. How does that work?
Satellite imaging technology is one of the most fascinating things because you don't go and dig, you don't do anything, and you can find literally a pyramid under the sand, which I was a part of a team that we did. I'll walk you through it. It's very simple. Google images, like Google satellite images. Yeah. If you look at those images, you have to have the premium service, but that's but if you look at those images at different dates where after wetness, after rain, the sand itself, you look at it, and the thing with the sand, for instance, is that it looks different colors every time it's drier. The more it's dry, the more it's light in color, right?
Right.
So let's say a day after a rain, you take a picture, satellite image of this part of the desert, and you look at it. And let's say there was rain, and let's say there's a pyramid under the sand. The top of that pyramid would be closest to the surface, and the sides of that pyramid are deepest from the surface, which means if you see a square of dark sand that gets lighter in color as it gets in, the sand in the middle got driest fastest because it's least dense, and the sand on the outside is getting driest slower because it's more dense. Hence, you just found a pyramid under the ground.
Wow.
We use that technology with a fascinating archaeologist. Her name is Sarah Parkak. She's not one of the best. She is the best. They call her space archaeologist because she can find the pyramids under the sand. We use that technology. We wanted to prove it right. So we did take it to the Egyptian government and asked, hey, we believe there's a pyramid under this sand. They said, you're crazy, but with enough scientific studies, we were approved to start digging.
Little bakshish.
But actually, that department is the one department in Egypt at the time where you cannot break.
Okay.
It's a bureaucracy.
That's good, though. Hey,
bureaucracy was like,
at all costs.
Because there's a lot of international involvement in it. But anyway, they got the permission, started digging, and there was a pyramid under the sand.
It's crazy because those
undiscovered
are humongous pyramids, and it's just buried under the sand.
And you can't even see them. The sand is all the same. Undiscovered pyramid under the sand, and it was laying right in front of us all this time. And that's and the amazing part, the fascinating part, is that we didn't need to dig for hundreds of years around this area to find a pyramid under the sand. We just looked at Google Images on our phones.
Unfreaking believable. That's so crazy. So when you're on a dig like that, when you go and dig, I assume you need security and stuff like that to dig in the middle of the desert.
The thing, yes, you will find this shocking, but what comes as a side effect of police brutality is complete safety. So when I lived in Egypt and we had very strong police and at the time strict, brutal is a good word for it, police, it was very safe. I left my car open. There was no thieves, and no one dared to do anything
because they'd go to prison and
yeah. But I mean, that is the side effect of police brutality,
right?
Right, which is not a good thing. But
no,
you get that,
right? The police state, the upside is security. The downside is lack of freedom. Yeah.
Yes.
When I went to Egypt, this is more than 20 years ago now. We went all the way down as far south as you could legally go or safely go.
Yeah.
And then there was a military convoy that took us up in Jeeps. And I went on the last Jeep because, I don't know, I was dicking around.
Yeah.
And this is because this group, Abu Simbel or something, had killed a bunch of Greek tourists thinking they were Israelis. So they put me in the back of the truck with some soldiers and some other tourists, and they said, don't fall off. And he was definitely not joking because they were gunning it down the road. And we would bump up and we would fly up in the air. And I'm like, oh, no, I could really fall off. And they're not checking. Like, I'm going to just be in this road, this dirt road. And then what? I don't know. Just stuck there. That was really scary because especially when you're at the end, you realize you're at the end of the security thing.
You're not exaggerating. That is 100% true story. That's how they did it to make sure you're safe and they are safe.
They were flying, man. We were gunning it fast.
There was a time in Egypt where they couldn't control that area from terrorism. And there's a time in Egypt right after the Muslim Brotherhood got all like, it became an illegal. The government have declared the Muslim Brotherhood an illegal party, which means anyone that is a Muslim Brotherhood would go to jail.
Oh yeah,
which creates it's very silly. It's a very silly thing to do because you just called 20% of the people.
Yeah, criminals who are essentially making them guilty.
You also make them criminals if they're not.
That makes sense and is kind of terrifying. For what that sort of implies for the state. I know we're running out of time. There's a couple of things I want to make sure I ask. When I took a felucca up the Nile, which is like a small sailboat, there was you'd have to stop and go to the bathroom. And there was one time where we saw a little structure on the side of the Nile. This is in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So we get out and I'm like, well, okay, we're done peeing. I want to look in this thing. All it was essentially a bush, a little structure, and a staircase that went straight down. And I think there's probably water in there because it was next to the Nile, but I don't know. And there's hieroglyphics, they're still colored, everything was absolutely incredible. And I thought, I can't believe we're seeing this. This is just like open, there's nothing around. So it's probably been that way for 1,000 years or more. And I'm looking and it's really short. The door is short because I guess ancient Egyptians were probably like 4 feet tall or something.
Not true, but keep going.
Really? The doorway was small.
I think that's rude, but keep going.
Yeah. But we realized that we probably should not just go down an ancient staircase into a tomb or whatever that was. And we started without any light. So we started to go back up and we realized the entire ceiling, which we thought was moldy, was just bats. Furry little bats.
No.
Yeah. It was really interesting.
You're lucky, man, that you came out of that without the curse of the mummies.
Well, that and also just like, how dumb are you to go down a staircase in the middle of Egypt that's been there for 1,000 years?
But ancient hieroglyphs, that's the addiction. You want to discover something. You want to see something that no one has seen.
It was pretty freaking cool.
Yes.
Not gonna lie. What is that though? Are there tombs just with stairs that go down? Why would there just be stairs that go down? I've always wondered what that was. The captain had no idea. Because I don't know what that is.
Well, but that's the tombs with stairs going down, you're saying?
Yeah, it was just like a structure, like a nothing structure with a staircase that went just down as far as you could see.
Yes, the elevation from a pyramid to tombs buried on the ground happened because of tomb raiding. So once tomb raiding took place, people stopped making their tombs obvious. They had to dig down all the way and create a whole structure down, like a whole burial chamber, multiple burial chambers under the ground to keep it safe from tomb raiding. Block the top. So even the priests that would take that body to bury it, they have specific amount of time before they get out and a big block would come in and lock it, and no one will be able to access that tomb whether they wanted to or not later on.
Really?
It got harder and harder to get back into a tomb because of tomb raiding. So you went into a place where you were not supposed to go in.
Definitely.
And you are lucky that you have not been cursed.
Yeah, I suppose that's true, or at least bitten by a bat. Or
bats are horrible.
Falling. They were small, but it looks kind of cute. But I realized when I touched it that they were moving.
No,
Yeah, it was
they're
gross.
not cute. Bats are horrible.
Especially if you're a tomb raider or a tomb discoverer, as you are.
Discoverer, yes.
Thank you very much, man, for your time. I know we got to wrap it up. I really appreciate the super interesting conversation. Super appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.